Oh no, go live. Am I live?
I'm
All
showing that
right,
we're
we're
live. You're
live.
live.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Me and Adrian for today's live of How to Actually KPI. I'm Jess, CEO and principal consultant at Solving Work. I am all about giving leaders in logistics the bandwidth to close the gaps in process, technology, and partner with an engaged team that leads to permanent change. And I am also doing my last thing before I head to Europe. Check my post later today for some more details on that. And be sure to follow me on Instagram at Solving Work if you want to follow along the journey. But with all of that said, I'm going to pass it over to Adrian. I'm going to let him give his update or intro and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do before we jump into today's questions. Oh, wait, one more thing. Folks, if you want to interact with us, please drop comments in below and ask us questions, ask us to expand on something. If something comes to your mind, drop that in there and we will address those during the show. All right, Adrian.
Awesome. So my name is Adrian with Expand Your LLC. That's a play on words where I expand your operational capabilities. And I help you do this one of three ways: by helping you build a great team incredibly fast, by getting all your departments to stop pointing fingers at each other and work and play better together, and by getting the most out of your warehouse space all 4 quarters of the year. You will learn what the big dogs do well, and you will also learn what the big dogs do better. And I specialize in distribution centers, fulfillment centers, and last mile delivery stations. Thank you, Jess.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's just kick it off. I have my thoughts on what your favorite KPI is, but I'm going to hand that question over to you. What is your favorite KPI? And for those that may not know, that's key performance indicator, and why?
Okay, my favorite KPI is flex budget. And I learned this from my days at Target. And flex budget is my favorite because we had this one where we normally went by called CE, or common expectations, or average. So average temperature in Atlanta is 70 degrees. However, it is June, and last night the low temperature was like 82. So we're not even close to 70, right? So I take that same concept to flex budget. So yeah, your average may be 50 cases an hour, but when you get to something like Halloween candy, that's very easy because you can grab 5 or 10 boxes at once and move them. So in a 10-hour shift doing Halloween candy, you may earn 13 or 14 hours worth of work to average expectation, but you're going to run 100% to flex budget because the system knows it's easy to handle. On the flip
Mm.
side, you have microwaves and mini fridges where you're going to bust your hump and you're only going to run 65% to average expectation, but 100% to flex budget because it's difficult to move. So this is where, and it took me a while to get there, where I coached the behaviors instead of the numbers. So I could still coach somebody who at 7 hours into the shift says, well, I hit my 10 hours. I'm just going to chill out. I'm not going to do anything the rest of the shift. I said, oh no. So you're going to keep going. And here's why: because you say you don't like when you guys are dealing with the most difficult freight and you miss the numbers. And then we come and start about your efforts. So for me, it was a big focus on recognizing what we had in front of us, and the effort that people were putting forth, and being able to say, no matter what it was to the average, if the flex budget was 100%, then I know you gave it your all. And that's how you can recognize people for giving the right amount of effort, regardless of what the number says.
So I like that a lot because, and this is, what I think is a problem with some KPIs is that they completely lack context. And without context, you start chasing a number that may actually be hurting you because, you do what you have to do to hit the numbers instead of doing what's right for the business, doing what's right for the operation on that particular day. And especially when you have such skew variability, like maybe what you experienced at Target, and other people, may also, have, we end up in that sort of situation where we can chase a number instead of an outcome. And that's the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems with KPIs. My favorite is delivery promise met, because this is more of an end to end KPI, right? It goes beyond, on time or not on time, because the carriers like to uh, manipulate those numbers based on acts of God, or other things that might be happening. Now those are real live things, which is why your goal shouldn't be 100%. um, but did I tell at checkout that we were going to get this to their home on this date, and did it arrive on that date? Which means the warehouse has to do their job, which means our supply chain people have to do their job, because the inventory actually has to be where it's supposed to be. And then, the carriers need to do their job as well. And I think it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, me and you, because I'm sort of an outside the four walls person and you're the inside the four walls, but these things overlap so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, Go ahead.
The so when I was at Nike, we had this thing called SIFOT and DIFOT, which is shipped in full on time and delivered in full on time, which sounds very similar to delivery promise met. So yeah, we can ship in full on time means the warehouse sent it all out together all at once, but there's why would it be delivered across different days if it was all shipped out at the same time? And so, like you say, this is one of those things where it takes all of us and many other people that aren't even on this live stream to actually execute a very strong supply chain.
Yeah. And another thing is, I thought throughput was going to be your number one KPI. So now I'm going to ask you the question of, why is throughput not your favorite KPI? Where does it lack, or is
Uh,
this other one just, head and shoulders better?
that's a very good question. So because you said we will end up chasing the wrong thing. So when we chase through, let's say, okay, I have Halloween candy and I have Sterilite, these big plastic tubs that you use for storage, and they're on the dock at the same time. Well, the customer wants both of them. But because I'm chasing throughput, I'm going to run all the candy and all the other gravy freight to maintain that throughput. And even worse, I'm going to sandbag because I know it's easy freight and I'm only going to give 10 hours of work, even though I should have got 13 or 14.
Hmm.
So when there's no gravy freight left, we are left with nothing but the garbage junk freight that nobody wants to deal with because it's painful.
Yeah.
And then you're going to run 10 hours and you're going to earn 6.5. And everybody's going to be like, why the hell did you have a 35% shortfall to expectations? And it's because you didn't balance out the freight.
Hmm.
And I would tell people all the time, you have to share the wealth and you have to share the poverty, right? So you
Yeah.
can't just go after all the gravy freight because there's one shift, and I don't want to get any shift wars, but usually night shift or weekend shift is going to catch the short end of the stick and have to run all the gravy freight, and people are going to Monday morning quarterback and say, how come you guys suck? Well, it's because throughout the week, all we did was run the easy freight because we were chasing a number instead of a level of service, what the customer needs.
Yeah. Any thoughts on, so we've got a comment here on cost per mile or energy per ton mile. I like the idea of, I mean, both of these are good indicators. I think cost per anything can potentially drive the wrong behaviors. When we think of cost without the balance of service, we get into trouble. But I love energy per, because we do need to understand our sustainability efforts in the long term, and balance, sustainability efforts against cost, against people, against other things. And again, I think that goes back to what I mentioned before, is context. Context is the number one most important thing when you're trying to leverage metrics to achieve an outcome. But do you have any thoughts on these KPIs?
Yeah, is this the question from Robert?
Hmm.
Yeah, so that question looks like it's like I said, it's freight. So looks like railroad, like truckloads
Hmm.
and even like air containers. And so for most of my last mile, it's been parcel. So FedEx,
Yeah.
Amazon, last mile, which is a little different than freight. So I will be speaking on a KPI I'm not as familiar with, but to make a similar one in last mile. So we did look at pieces per stop. We did
Mm.
look at stops per total stops per, or it was like SPR. I forget what the SPR stood for.
Score stops per on road hour. Are you a former UPSer?
I was a former UPSer as well, so
Okay.
former UPSer, former FedExer,
And
and Amazon.
NDPPH, net delivered packages per hour. I can't.
Oh
It
yeah,
has been like I think almost 20 years since I worked for UPS, and these numbers still wake me up
right,
in the middle of the night. So, um,
right.
but
So
again,
to
same thing as what you were mentioning on cherry picking the good freight.
Mhm.
Like I remember back in the day, you could have drivers come and like get the dispatch supervisor to cut little areas off their route if it was like too far out of the way or whatever, and just like put that on someone else, like because you wanted to hit your numbers. And when you get too numbers driven rather than team driven, rather than what are our numbers as an entire organization, you end up with like the by trying to hit the number, you cost your operation more.
Yeah, and one thing that so I taught the temporary driver class at FedEx Ground, and there was this one thing we talked about. It was called "Wait a Minute," and I said, "Hey, look, when you're delivering product to a customer, you can't stop and talk to them, even though they're trying to be friendly. And here's how you do it without being rude, and here's why: because you may have up to 120 stops on your route, and if you stop for 1 minute." At every single stop, that's 120 minutes, which is an extra 2 hours. And we only have 11 hours that we can drive out of 14 being on duty. So it really does impact. Um, and another difference that between UPS and FedEx is UPS, their drivers were employees, while at FedEx Ground, they were contractors. And so at FedEx Ground, they owned a certain zip code or part of that zip code. So everything within this boundary, they had to deliver. And I saw, to go back to the service and delivery, another person that's in our industry or adjacent said FedEx Ground marked my package undeliverable because they said I was closed. How am I closed if I'm at home? Right. And it goes to a service metric, right? So they were saying, well, if I don't think I'm going to deliver this, let me mark this as closed, which is a delivery exception. So it kind of padded their
Hmm.
number. So it's something that could be unique to a driver, or it could be unique to a building, or it could be unique to a company. So
Well, you just reminded me. I posted this in January, and it was a status, a delivery status that Amazon put on one of my packages. And again, if we mark a package as delivered, now our on time percentage looks good. But the delivery status was likely delivered.
right.
I was like, how is likely delivered a good um, metric for you? It was very interesting, but this was more of when KPIs go wrong. All right. Well, actually, that's the next question I have on here. What have been your experiences where KPIs go wrong? We have put this in to save money to improve our operation, and we end up hurting ourselves. What have been some of your experiences?
The KPI I see go wrong a lot. Uh, is typically when it comes to like engagement scores, right? And they're like, well, how well do people like you? Well, it kind of depends, right? Like if the building has been underperforming and you're brought in to get it to perform, uh, you can be as nice as you want, but at some point you're going to have to hold a lot of people accountable. And when you start holding people accountable, then all of a sudden you're an unfriendly person, right? And
Hmm.
so it can really get in the way of progress you're making because they know the metric that actually pays everybody's bills is the one that's being moved. But is everybody always going to like that the party's over and now that they have to
Mm.
actually work for their paycheck? No. So that's something that I have seen get in the way a couple of times. And a popularity contest. Again, we're here to make money. We have metrics that I didn't come up with. These are customer based metrics, and these are things that allow customers to return and to keep bringing revenue in. It helps pay us all of our paychecks.
Yeah, it's so much easier to hold a boundary than it is to make a new boundary. And when you're in a turnaround, the engagement score is obviously it's going to dip, but it probably wasn't very good to begin with whoever the leadership was before, because people don't like to lose either. You know, if you're constantly um, in an underperforming building, I imagine you're going to be frustrated. The other side of the engagement scores that I've seen in my career, and this will be more of a like in the office type thing, is when some of these like anonymous surveys are sent out. But it's like, okay, if I mark the department poorly, then instead of being able to do our job, we're going to have to go through some sort of HR training, and I don't have time for that. So instead of being honest about what the situation is in my department and my role and my team, I'm just going to mark everything good and move on. So I think we really, this is the key piece of any KPI that we set out there is what are the consequences? What are we incentivizing? How do we know, especially when they're ranked or whatever, they're not measured with time or dollars. How do we know that that's really the right information, that we're getting anything of um, of value? I think you have definitely picked one that is classically goes wrong across the board. That's interesting.
Indeed.
All right.
So go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you start working with a warehouse, how do you set sort of initial goals, like first 30, 90, 180 days? Because I find another I truly believe that mindset matters. And if you are doing a good job, you should be able to feel like you're doing a good job. To come in and drive accountability, but make everyone feel like a loser. Uh, I don't know if that's necessarily a win. So do you stagger your goals or somehow position it as you're going through a transformation when you're doing a turnaround?
Yeah. So again, this was my favorite experience was probably from 2013. Um, we I worked weekend nights, and we offered all of the employees the opportunity to balance to whatever shift they wanted to, and then we were going to backfill with temp labor for peak season, and
Hmm.
we did that. And so working weekend nights, that's the least desirable shift. So we ended up losing uh, basically our first, second, and third string uh, people for all of our critical roles. So we had to rebuild in quarter four, which was about as fun as it sounds. Um, so our worst weekend, we went 480 hours in the hole. So we had 20 people that started in the classroom for 12 hours. That's 240 hours. Day two, in the classroom for half of that. So that's another 120. And day three, they were all on the floor, but they were slowing everybody down because they were brand new. So we lost another 120. So that's the 480 we lost in one weekend. Of course, we got yelled at, got scolded. It is what it is. And then said, look, guys, we're not going to break even next week. But what we can't do is we can't be 480 hours in the hole again. So we need to shoot for 430. We need to shoot for a 50-hour improvement because they're all still new and they're learning. And so each week, we went from 430 to minus 380 to minus 330. And again, we're getting yelled at like, why are you not making money? Why are you not breaking even? Why are you losing hours? Hey, look, don't listen to all that stuff. Here's what we need to focus on: minus 330, minus 280, minus 230. And so you have to, build people up and kind of shield them from you can't pay attention to the crowd, right? When
Hmm.
80,000 people cheer against you, that's called an away game. It doesn't mean that you're actually bad. A lot of people cheer against Tom Brady as he's winning a Super Bowl. So that was the same mentality I took with them. And over the next, by week 10, at an increase of 50 hours over a week, each week, then you can see that we started to break even by the 10th week. We were positive 20 hours of budget. And then week 11, 12, and 13, we were able to start increasing. So that's how I do it. It's very difficult for a building to get that bad overnight. So we can't
Mm,
expect it to become profitable overnight either. So as much time as
yeah.
it took to get there, you're going to probably need at least that amount of time to dig out of the hole.
Yeah, and I again is right. And knowing and that's your role as a leader, right? Is to protect your team from the from the negative output saying, "Hey, you guys aren't good enough." When you're learning, it's that ability to give them grace to move and make progression that's reasonable. And I think that's a battle that's probably fought often between the leaders that are on in the warehouse and the folks that are maybe more in nicer offices elsewhere in the building, and making sure that they understand the context. Like, yeah, we could be um, below average, but not this bad right away with no upside, or you can make an investment. A return on investment requires an investment, and you have to do that. But as a leader, you have to have these conversations with the higher ups so that they understand. Hey, this is not. You can't have all of the things you want immediately, but if you really want this is the path to get there, and this is how we're going to be successful. We've got an awesome question from Kevin. um, KPIs versus objectives and key results. I'm going to go ahead and like qualify those as like goals. Um, and I would say that a goal should be supported by a KPI. That there's a current state and a future state, and the goal is somehow transitioning that or maintaining that after we've hit a goal. But that KPIs actually are there to serve your goals. And if the KPIs that I'm chasing are in conflict with the goals we've set as an organization, as a team, as a department, then we have work to do. That's sort of my thought on that. What do you think, Adrian?
I like the way you put that, and probably hadn't put that much thought into it because I've dealt mainly in KPIs. So on the surface, I would look at them as okay, tomato, tomato, six on one hand, half a dozen on the other. Like how you said, the overall goal is the OKR, and maybe the KPI is where you are in the moment, and you know you need to get this KPI to pretty much match what the OKR is. Um, so let me look at a little bit more. He said essential tools for performance, goal setting, stable framework. Okay, drive strategic initiatives. Yeah, so that's I just now read that because there's a lot going on and whatnot. But
Yes.
but yeah, like I like the way that you broke that down, and I like the way that Kevin framed that as well. And thank you also, John, for getting us to get the full definition for those who may not know what that is.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yes. And that's the thing. So, and this kind of actually, the questions are perfect today. They are just like lining up with the outline, because when I think about when if I only look at KPIs, I might want to improve that KPI until the end of time, right? I'm always looking for improvement, more, better, better, better. And that's the question that I have for you, especially in terms of something like throughput or whatever. Is there a ceiling? Because I think when we start looking at OKRs, now we're looking at our strategic initiatives, like, that are more amorphous, that may be less like number driven, like customer, like we're going to achieve our brand promise, and my goal might be something within that brand promise, and then I have KPIs to know whether or not I am on the path that I think I am on. But do you think you can is more always better, or is there a ceiling for some of these KPIs that we need to accept, and whereas we if we drive past them we start to lose?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the best example. It goes back to black and white television. It's the episode of Lucy where Lucy and Ethel went to the chocolate factory, right? And then they were like, okay, I could keep up. And then the line started speeding up, and next thing you know, half of them are going past them. Um, and so that's an example of where too much is, or too, you can have a throughput ceiling. Another example is if I said, hey, look, I serve 40% more burgers than any other fast food restaurant with the same staff, but that's because all the burgers are raw, right? I didn't actually, I'm cutting corners. So at some point, you're going to cut corners. So the most relevant example, this guy was doing putaways with pallets kind of like these. And to do a pallet audit, a putaway audit, they need to be as close to the upright as possible, no more than 3 inches of overhang. And I was supposed to audit 20 of them. And I audited like 15 of them, and they were all horrible. They were like 6 inches away. They were like, an inch too far inside. And really, so I asked the guy, I said, look, Mike, I'm going to ask you a question. He was running like 140%. And I asked him, I said, are you more focused on numbers or quality? He said, I'm not going to lie. I'm focused on the numbers. I said, look, I get it. I can tell. But my thing is this, the way you're putting these pallets away is actually so bad. It's a safety hazard because these things are barely on the rack. And if anybody bumps them just a little bit, they're going to topple over. And am I telling you to slow down? Yes and no. I'm telling you to put more time into the quality of the put away. And so he says, okay, I want you to find me later. And yeah, when I audited him later again, all 20 of his pallets were put away perfectly. And yeah, he was running like maybe 110 for the night. So again, just because you can go faster doesn't mean that you're doing anything better.
Yeah, I mean, and that your call out on safety when we're talking KPIs in a warehouse, we're talking driver KPIs. Safety has to be the number one thing, and that's part of the ceiling. Is when we ask people to hit an unreasonable work standard, and then probably incentivize that with money. We are setting ourselves up for some sort of safety issue, and we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth. We can't be like, oh, the most important thing is days without incident, but then also the most important thing is hitting this unsustainable number that we can't do safely. Like you must have like a cohesive um, set of indicators, which again is part of that like goal alignment and everything too. John's asked a good question. Do you have any best practices for the leaders out there looking to create new KPIs or modify or update old KPIs? How do you make a transition from the numbers they had been using to maybe numbers that are more appropriate?
Yeah, so this is I do got to jump it at 12:30. So this would be
Oh,
a good
shoot.
closer. And
Last
this
one.
is this is actually the last question. So what if you don't have the data for the KPI you really want? So how to build one? So you will have to build a metric. And there are some basic questions like how much do we have to do? When does it need to be done? How many people does it take based off the rate? What's the shift length? How often do I need to do this? Uh, and if I get all the stuff, when is it too early for me to get it and too early for me to start? And when is it too late for me to even do anything about it, even with the contingency plan? I need to understand all the lead times that go to any part of it that go into it. I also need to understand my yield. So for every 10 I put in, I get 7 out. Is that acceptable? Does it need to be 8 or 9? And what if it's 6? What do I do? Our capacity. What is our max? And I'm telling you, if you tell somebody who can do more, we're going to fail. And then the last thing, okay, so if this goes wrong and that goes wrong, what do I do here? What do I do there? A contingency. So those are some things that I would start with.
And I'm going to echo that. If you have a KPI and you don't have a plan for when it goes out of threshold, you don't have anything. You have nothing of value. So don't make a KPI if you don't know what you're going to do if it goes out of threshold. All right, last up, Adrian, tell people where they can find you and how they can interact with you.
Awesome. The best place to interact with me is on LinkedIn. Let me see. I'm not sure if I can drop it in, but yeah, Adrian Betts. There are probably 15 Adrian Betts in the world on LinkedIn. I'm the only Black one. So again, Adrian Betts. There you go. I got a website, supplychange.ventures, supplychange.ventures, because it's going to be a venture as we change our supply chain.
I
Thank
love
you.
that. Thank you guys. Thank you, Adrian, for showing up. Thank you for everyone who came and dropped comments. I really appreciate it. Have a great one, everybody.
Later.